we're good.
Well, let me go mute for a second.
All right, we are live. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to call to order the Infrastructure Bond Engagement Steering Committee. Present are Bennett,
Boy,
Lewis.
Gonzalez.
Stapleton.
Okay, very good. And then city staff as well as here to help us along. At this point, we're going to take just a moment. Every meeting will begin with public comment. So as you know, folks who want to comment on this in this context, they'll need to check in early, and we have basic rules around that, which is fairly similar to the city council. We have received written comment, and you have received copies of that. So we'll take that in mind. The one that came in latest was the library board. I hope you all have a copy of that from Lois. Okay, great. Okay, and I think what I'll do now is turn this over to Courtney to kind of have us get going here. Make sure we cover the areas we want to get covered.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I'm going to be starting with the communications and engagement. I believe it's item 3 on the agenda. So this is going to be a schedule of key milestones. This is sort of our attempt to kind of explain what the purpose of this particular body is and what we hope to accomplish together. And we have Clark Worth here with us. Clark is representing Barney and Worth, and Barney and Worth is the firm that the city has hired to help with this portion of our work together on communications and engagement as we build ideas for the proposal that will be before voters in November of 2022. So the first part of our agenda is really getting clear on the initial scope of work around the communications and engagement, these key milestones that we're driving towards. And then we'll spend some time on our agenda really building that foundation for what this $300 million proposal is anyway, and where we're starting from. And then we'll have a conversation for your discussion really about what kinds of things you might be wrestling with as you're considering which projects to include and which, as we're doing some crowdsourcing along the way of project ideas, which ones, how are you going to be making decisions? And we don't have to have a recommendation today. We have still time for that, but it is a really good opportunity for us to flood some of those things that you might be considering as we get closer. So with that, I'll just start with sharing 3 slides on communications and engagement. And it will go just like this. Maybe just a minute. There's many screens in the world, particularly in mine. So that should be oh dear. I think you are now seeing a 3.
Yes, ma'am.
But it looks like you're seeing all of them.
Yes, we are.
Well, that might just be the way it goes. For some reason, it's choosing not to show them in the way I would prefer. So we'll just start here.
Courtney, if you go down to the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a little shaded button and it's got this format highlighted.
The bottom right that I
Bottom
can't
right
see.
In the menu bar, there's a little shaded
Yes.
thing that shows the bar on
Now
the left.
seeing,
There you go, hit that one.
I am, and it won't respond. Excellent. So what we have before you is some major milestones that we're working towards. You can see that we're trying at this point to really define the scope of the bond proposal. So we have December, January, and into February, we're doing some stakeholder engagement, talking with all the neighborhood associations, community groups, and everyone that will listen, really, about the general idea that we're putting forward, this $300 million bond for November of 22, and asking for input about the kinds of projects that might really be of interest as we're speaking with neighborhoods and community groups, everybody really on a micro level, what kinds of projects would really be of interest. And then beginning in March, April, May, we start to define the proposal more clearly, what we're seeking support for. And then we begin talking about that with more community groups and neighborhood associations. We plan to be filing around September and then moving into more of the campaign around the measure. Clark, would you have anything to add before I switch to the next? Sorry, Clark, unmute.
Courtney?
Yes.
Hey, sorry about that. I don't know if this is the point at which you might want to elaborate a little bit more on the public education before the ballot measure is filed versus after, when different rules apply.
Yes, please do.
Well, under the way the election law works in Oregon, once the ballot measure is filed, the city staff are limited in what they can do, how they can communicate, and limited to communication that has been of the type that has been approved by the Secretary of State's office. So that's a limitation. So yesterday we were talking about this with staff, and it looks on the calendar like you have 11 months to communicate, do public education. But the reality of it is, after that's filed, the measure is filed in either August or September, there are some limitations. And communication is still appropriate, public education is still appropriate, but there are limitations on, legal limitations on what you can do.
Thank you, Clark. And if anyone has any questions about any of this, please feel free to jump in. We'll just keep going until anyone just chime in. The next slide we have is really more focused on what are some of the key measures of success for ballot measures. And this, Clark, this is really a slide for you to kind of speak to about what are the key ingredients anyway.
Introducing myself, I'm Clark Worth with Barney & Worth, for those of you I haven't met in the past. Our firm has been in business for 40 plus years. And through all of that time, I've been working with clients, mostly municipal clients, on ballot measures, typically money measures being put on the ballot. And we worked on Salem's Keep Salem Moving measures successfully in the past, and any number of other measures, including up to the last election cycle here when we had 3 measures on the ballot. About the time of the downturn in 2008, which is the vintage of Keep Salem Moving, we realized it was going to be difficult to pass money measures. And so we tried to look back at what the success factors were. What could we predict success? And then could we do something about the success factors? And so we developed this success gauge, and we've refined it a bit over time. But what we found here is that if we can check all of these boxes, then we're pretty sure we've got a ballot measure that's going to be approved by voters. And we do a lot of things to start testing that pretty early on. Some of the ones there that are key are understanding the need. Do voters understand the need for this? And we do, certainly at the staff level, often is the case. We've done a lot of research on this. We've done our own work. We know what we need. We need money to do this and that. However, it's very seldom that there's much of that has penetrated to voters. So we'll test that early and then talk about what can be done about that. And then second, the voters understand the solution, that what we're proposing, does it seem to address the problem as we understand it and they understand it? On the key stakeholders side, probably the single most important thing is the city council being fully supportive. A single elected official can often kill a ballot measure, certainly make it difficult to pass. And we have some things that there are some city council members who have reservations or opposed even. We have some ways to address that, but that is always a challenge if there is not unanimous support from council. And the best is unanimous support in the form of leadership, council members not just raising their hand, but also being able to articulate why it is that they think it's so important to pass this. And then, especially because of the limitations in the latter part of the campaign, we need people who can speak up on our behalf. And so hopefully champions that we can identify in the community for Keep Salem Moving. That role was played by the Chamber of Commerce that developed the PAC for this, and the Chamber of Commerce really ran that part of the campaign, which was, again, a decisive victory. And in 2008, if you think of the economic conditions in 2008, what we would face in November 22 are likely to be worse than they were in 2008. So, that really was I would say was the worst part, but it was certainly the earliest bad part of the Great Recession. So, and despite that, we continue to pass ballot measures throughout that economic downturn. And I'm confident whatever the economic conditions are in 2022, you can pass this too. But you have to make sure that as many of these boxes as possible are going to be checked. We'll be aiming to try to check every single one of them. And then the bottom one there, which is always the most difficult, is keeping everybody on message. What we'll be doing is opinion research. There's already been some done, but we'll be doing more opinion research to find out how it is that voters see these problems, how it is they articulate the benefits that they would see in passing a bond measure. And we'll be using their messaging essentially to communicate about this. How did they hear this? And that's the way that we want to talk about it, is how they hear it. The fire chief gave a very eloquent example yesterday in a previous fire measure of an adjustment that was made in the messaging based on opinion research that turned out to be decisive, and they got a big victory. And so that is extraordinarily, it's difficult to keep everybody on message, but it kind of sounds repetitive when you hear it, but it's things that we know test well with voters because we've done the opinion research to prove that. So that's some quick highlights. Again, we pay attention to this from the very start, looking, for example, at how credible is the city of Salem with voters right now, and looking at the resources that we have that are already available to test that, and then moving on from that to issues related to the ballot measure.
Thanks, Clark. We have a lot of time too for question and answer and tapping some of that expertise that you guys have. The last piece I want to share with you guys is what we're already doing, just so that you have a sense that we've gotten started in some of this engagement work already. So we have a web page up already, which is how people are finding out about this, as well as the news article, I'm sure. We have some key messages ready. We're going to have a presentation that you can take with you and share with any group that you have an opportunity to speak with. We are currently collecting ideas, and you can see the example on the right hand of the screen. We're collecting ideas from people right now electronically. If they have any ideas for 3 of the specific areas that can be scaled to meet the need those being transportation, so streets, bridges, and sidewalks, parks or recreation facilities, and then acquisition of property or building of affordable housing and sheltering. So those three ideas are the main places where we're trying to collect suggestions for projects. As you know, we're taking public testimony in these meetings, and then we have a plan to come to every neighborhood association and a bunch of community groups through January and February, and then again in March, April, May. We'd love to have your help and participation in some of these briefings and presentations around the neighborhoods and in the community. So we'll be asking you, based on the schedule as it gets built out, we'll be asking to see if you would be interested and available in taking part in some of those briefings. So with that, I'm going to stop this screen share because it's gone so well, and just see if anybody has any questions about the engagement strategy that we're employing, or any ideas or suggestions that you want to give us as we start out on this endeavor. Yes, Councillor Hoy.
Thanks, Courtney. I have a question about, I guess, level of detail or level of specificity that we need to have in the bond measure. Do we need to say things like, oh, we want to improve roads, or do we need to say we want to improve the intersection at 12th and State? I mean, what level of specificity do we have to get to in these programs?
That's a great question. And I know that everybody is jumping to their mics to answer. It's almost like Jeopardy, but I saw Josh first, and he has an answer for us.
So the actual ballot language will be fairly broad. It'll have the categories of infrastructure, but we're hoping to support that ballot measure language with the projects that are recommended. And then, of course, with flexibility where needed if something changes within that 10 years. So specific for especially like road projects, things like that, where those are identified.
Does that answer the question? We have varying levels of detail, I'm sure.
So
and part of our meeting today will be to develop how we're going to prioritize those projects. That's part of today's discussion, Courtney?
Part of today's discussion, I'm hoping we can share how what's worked in the past in terms of being able to navigate which projects to include, which projects might not be included. We have some examples from capital improvement program selection. We have some examples from the last time we were successful with a transportation bond and other bits and pieces. And so we want to share with you what we know so far, and then hear from you about other ideas that we might want to consider. I'll bring something back the next time you meet for, based on this conversation today and all the other bits and pieces, and engage you guys in a conversation for a recommendation to give to the full council on how to make those choices.
I'd like to take another run at my question. I didn't quite get the information I was looking for, and I apologize if I didn't say it, if I didn't word my question clearly. So in developing this strategy, what level of specificity are you looking for? Like when you're asking us what we might want to spend money on in this bond, are you asking us for broad categories, or are you asking us for specific projects? Forget the ballot language for a minute.
Yes, and I think the answer to your question is both. So right now what we have is, and we can move into that part in just a moment, but we have general ideas about how much each of those project categories might need of that 300 million. But then we tried to come up with some example projects so that people could imagine what that would look like, or what level of scale of project we're hoping to try to get ideas on. So we're asking for both. Peter, do you want to make that sound better?
Yes, please. Well, I want to add to it. So, Councillor, in no uncertain terms, by the time we get to the ballot, we need a list of projects. So what Courtney is talking about is early on in this process that we're having with this committee, we want to have the mayor and the councillors give us the ranges. We've in the staff report and Josh's staff report, there was the amount, and I think there's a slide at some point that's that talks about scalable and specific. We're very specific about what we need for the fire apparatus, but we have the word scalable for transportation and for parks. So the first and foremost for this committee are the general numbers correct? And then as we engage the community and come back with information, as we engage the council, as we engage the staff, we're going to have to come up with a list of projects. The same way that fire has a list of apparatus, very specific, we will need a list of very specific projects.
Where did the list of categories come from? Is that from our finance committee? And are those tested categorical areas? I mean, is that why they're here in front of us? Are these the ones? Is that the static part of this, or what's going on with the categories?
I think, and I'll want Josh to jump in, Mayor, but the categories were developed, I think, in conjunction with the finance committee. That if we were going for this large, multi-year bond, what is sort of the need and at what level are the needs? And the only thing that, in my mind, the only thing that's very well set and very well defined is the fire apparatus, because the chief has been in need of this for a number of years and has been talking about it for a number of years. Things like streets and parks are, the needs are much greater than the amounts that the community would ever be able to afford. So it's really just any projects will help. So that's why those numbers are a little more flexible. But yes, those dollar categories are all. It's really a start to, like, this is what we as staff suggest that you consider, but there is flexibility. Josh, please add.
We've had multiple conversations with the finance committee over the last, what would you say, Peter, 6 years, maybe longer, about this kind of idea and looking at the categories. The finance committee recommendation didn't break it down into these specific amounts or these categories. This is a combination of the fixed need, as Peter was describing, and then the scalable, trying to get chunks of infrastructure such as parks and streets on into that 300 million. So it's really a working draft for you guys to give us feedback on.
So kind of going back to Chris's question then, if we were to look at the portion, let's just say this, there's got fire equipment set, streets, bridges, sidewalks is another one that has a long-term need, and we're talking about a 10-year bond, and we aren't going to go out again. And you're also talking about a geographic and kind of equity lens for those projects. Are you going to be able to fairly rapidly come up with a project scope or list that would begin to set that portion of this ballot measure? And the same thing with parks, where you can actually say, here's the list. It'd be much like the fire chief did with the equipment, is kind of, here's what we're going to need to make this work and to meet that strategy of having a citywide ballot measure.
The answer is absolutely yes, Mayor. In fact, as a starting point, we laid out a list of projects to kind of get an idea. We used the CIP. We used the transportation plan. We used our own knowledge of the needs that are out there. So we have some ideas, but what we've made very clear is that we want to hear from the public what some of their ideas are. And this is something that worked really well for us for the 2008 bond, where we engaged the public in a number of meetings to hear what they wanted, what they were looking for. And we used those engagements to lay out the project list. Will
the counselors and staff have kind of that list of projects, so that if Chris is out in his ward, he's going to say, hey, I think one of them will be, are you interested in Fisher Road? Or, these, how will that list be made available to counselors so they can work it along the way, looking for public? Okay. Yeah.
I mean, well, first we want, we're happy to share kind of our draft idea, but I don't want those ideas confused with that's the final list. And
Right,
that was just to,
right.
hey, if we're going to spend 100 million, how do we get there? So I want to make sure that the council understands and the public understands that yes, we have that list, but it is absolutely a starting point.
Yeah.
And we really want to hear from the public, and we want to hear from the council to
And-
set that list.
And Councillor Hoy wants to add, and I'll just say that most of our infrastructure plans, you know, we have one for streets, bridges, we have one for bike walk Salem, we have one for parks system improvements. All of those were the result of community engagement. And so we have already many project ideas, and they're already in an infrastructure plan. So that means they're easier to build
Right.
when we have the money. So I just, we have a lot of great ideas. The question is really, how do we build the right set of ideas to ensure that it's exciting enough for the community to approve a measure, and how do we make sure it's balanced, and all these other variables, which we can talk about a little bit later. Councillor Hoy, did you want to jump in? I think we might also need to switch back to the other presentation.
Chris, go ahead.
So I guess I have a little bit different question now. So regarding the public input that we got, I love those ideas in terms of I've been advocating for libraries out here in East Salem for a long time, but my concern about them about those suggestions in relation to this bond is that it would obligate us for some pretty significant ongoing costs outside the scope of the bond. Will we be considering projects that would do that, or where do those kinds of projects fall in this conversation?
That's a great question. And that's really, I think, something for us to consider as we're building that set of criteria. Like maybe we wouldn't include something that would have an impact on our operating costs, annual operating costs, or maybe there are one or two of those projects that we feel like we might be able to absorb. That's really kind of the question I think that we want to talk about as we're imagining how do we decide what to include anyway. That's I think a pretty important consideration.
And do look at in your packet that you received, you gave us that kind of information that sort of gives us, here's the kinds of things we might want to look at. We might want to hit that part when we're ready. If you're ready now, that's fine. But on the second page of this, beyond Roz's note to us, I think you put this together, Courtney, is here's the kind of considerations for developing specific project lists. That includes questions about ongoing operating costs and things like that.
Yes, I wonder if we could just take a couple of minutes to make sure that we're all on the same page about what this idea is anyway. What is this bond package, this bond proposal that we're talking about? If you don't mind, I'd like to take a couple minutes on that, because we have some project ideas or the types of projects that might work in some of these categories. And based on our last experience, I've asked Kelly to stand in and push the buttons. Thank you.
Hey, Courtney, I think Councillor Lewis's hand is up also.
I see, but I don't see Councillor Lewis.
Well,
Oh, there.
one of the reasons I have my hand up is I don't see me either. And so I'm going to let you know I'm going to get out of the meeting and then come back in. But before I do that, in case I get lost, and this is maybe to Councillor Hoy's point, the success of the 2008 bond measure was, as we progressed, the specificity of the projects became clearer and clearer. And so when people went to the ballot, fill out the ballot, they not only knew the amount, but they had a good idea of what the programs that were going to be done. And I believe that that's a menu for success, and I would hope we would be doing that again this time.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. So what you have before you is a really high level presentation, and we'll continue to refine this so that it's of use to you when you are out speaking about these ideas and getting ideas from people. The next slide is a high level overview. And it just shows the principles of having a $300 million bond for 10 years. We're able to do 300 million in community projects without changing the
All right, would you rather see them?
property tax rate. Steve, thank you. And the intent is to really plan and fund 10 years of projects and not return with individual project asks as during that time frame. The next slide, I think, Josh, this might be where you pick up and talk about our history and experience.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. So in the Finance Committee, we've talked about this quite a bit over the years. For those of you who aren't as familiar with general obligation bonds in Oregon, they're issued by the city. We issue for a debt service amount, so call it your mortgage payment, and then we submit that to the county and they turn it into a levy rate. So what you see in front of you is our levy rate since 2010. And you can see our various bonds. You can see streets and bridges, you can see fire, you can see the police facility, library. And then there in the right, starting in 2024 is the proposed bond before you. 300 million issued over those 10 years. We wouldn't issue it all at once. We don't have the capacity to issue it all in 2024. We'd have to strategically spread it out over those years to maintain that level levy rate. And why we have capacity is really those streets and bridges bonds falling off. We just refinanced them this last year. And if you don't remember, we saved about $1.7 million doing that for taxpayers, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to do that. But what that allows, that and we paid off the fire bond early, and then the streets and bridges bonds falling off, it allows this capacity where we can issue these bonds for this larger amount and plan with our financial advisor to keep that level levy rate over time. And I know it's a different concept and it's really hard to explain to people, but what we're going with is that no more than $1.28 levy rate. And we're trying to keep that consistent and easy to understand.
Yeah, I back on that. I think it's, Josh, the real challenge is going to be to take that bar chart and turn that into language that the average person understands. I don't think we should ever show that bar chart to anybody because that just is really hard to follow. I think for most folks, it is kind of like seeing, oh, okay, I got to get back and forth on the colors. How do we, I think one of the great communications difficulties that I'm sure we've hired the consultant for is to help us explain that in about 2 sentences and not have to rely on bar charts unless it's a very sophisticated audience that demands bar charts.
And on top of that, Mr. Mayor, I totally agree with your point there. I've heard it said twice now about no more than $1.28. People don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's better to say with no rate increase or no higher than our current level or something, like use those words rather than $1.28. Nobody knows, okay, what does that mean in terms of how much money I'm going to pay? I think if you just speak more specifically about that your taxes won't go up, those kinds of messages rather than $1.28, that nobody knows what it means.
Yeah, it's a careful balance between making sure we're speaking accurately and it's understandable, because it's a consistent tax rate, but your taxes do go up every year as your assessed value increases. So we have to be careful with the specific language that we use.
Sure.
Sometimes what we do is we play a game about keeping Courtney back on message, because I do things like when I look at this chart, what I see, and I know it's complicated and complex, but we are really amazing at just-in-time financing. And that's part of what I think, why are there 3 different streets and bridges measures here? Well, there's 3 different times that we issued bonds because we were very strategic in waiting until the more complicated projects were ready before we took the money out, before we took the loan, essentially. So there's certainly more we can do to make that ring true and be more visible, but the just-in-time financing and being really strategic with the resources entrusted to us is part of what makes us so successful and allows us to do more than we even commit to in the last couple of measures.
I will assure you, though, that if we tried to explain that in a neighborhood meeting, we'd never get out. It's just too complex a concept in a real, in those sort of quick hits we're going to be able to do as with neighborhood groups. You're given a few minutes at a neighborhood meeting to make a quick presentation, and it had better be quick, easy to understand, and very, very believable. And I hear what you're saying in terms of it's a pretty sophisticated thing the city's done to get to this point. It's very good. But it's how do you tell that story real simply?
Yes.
Because I had a couple of people come up to me the other day saying, I'm just not voting for that bond measure. I just don't buy this. So I got them to agree to sit down with me and go through it again. They just could not hear what I think's going on here very well. It's going to be tricky. Anytime you say we won't raise your taxes, the antenna go up.
And that's great feedback. If as you are all out and communicating with neighbors or other constituent groups, please do share what you're finding to work. We have some input from the focus groups, so we have some ideas, but we haven't yet, to I think an earlier point that you were making, Mayor, we haven't yet tested or polled on the specifics of the measure because we're still building them. Josh, can you go through the Finance Committee recommendation and just straight into the need, please?
Sure. And I think you all are familiar with this. We've been talking about it. The Finance Committee recommendation, 300 million in GO bonds over a 10-year period, that steady levy rate. And then it included this community engagement and outreach where we've hired Barney and Worth for them to help us with that. Next slide, please. This is what we've referred to a few times, that working draft of the categories of infrastructure. And then there on the right, you can see the fixed or scalable. We've talked about fire trucks and equipment. It's very fixed what we need. We have a very detailed list of equipment. We really can't get what we need for less than that 26 million, as opposed to scalable needs like streets, bridges, and sidewalks, where you could actually issue 500 million and still have more on the table of projects that you could do. So this is just taking a chunk of that scalable need. And then it goes down, we'll go through the categories in a second, but it equals that 300 million that we've talked about.
Are there any questions about that general?
Yeah. If I could, Courtney, and it's just a minor thing, but the staff report from October 25th showed a total of 267 million, and now it's gone up to 300 million. And I don't know if that was just leaving something off in that staff report, or are we constantly re-looking at these numbers? One of the things that I think is important is when you show a chart like this, it needs to be consistent throughout the process. And now this chart has already changed and it's only 6 weeks later.
I'll have to go back and check. I'm not sure which chart you're referring to, but I'll find out what the difference is.
The one right here that shows Civic Center seismic upgrade, on the staff report from October 25th, it showed public building improvements. Or no, yeah. And it was listed at 12 million. Now this is 45 million. It does add up to 300 million, but I took that original comment to say that the bond measure would be up to 300 million. And when I added it up, it came up to 267 million. That was from the report on October 25th. Now the number has changed to 45,000. That's the only one that's changed.
Okay, I think we got more specific calling it Civic Center seismic upgrade, but I'll go back and make sure I can map that out for you.
Okay, I just, I think it's important to have consistency with the numbers.
Agreed. Thank you for pointing that out. Oh, sorry, Councilor
No.
Stapleton?
It's okay. I just had a quick question, and I might be getting in the weeds. It's kind of what I do. But something came up for me. And I know in previous conversations, we've talked about folks not understanding the need for the fire department specifically, because they have all those shiny trucks that always look beautiful and well running. And I would love personally, before I go into a meeting, I would love data on the types of things that the cost of the repairs that we're having to accrue right now. And then also the response time data to where these 2 new fire stations that we're looking at, if I have the number right too, what that's going to do for our response times for our communities. I think those 2 points for me with the fire trucks, equipment, and stations is going to be really key.
It's so fabulous that you asked, because that is the perfect segue for what we are just about to discuss. Kelly will move the slide forward and you will get to see the specifics about the need. And Chief Niblock, can you come on screen and talk us through the need, please?
Absolutely. And good afternoon to everyone. This slide kind of lays out the types and the number of apparatus that we would need to replace in our fleet. Not all of our apparatus are here because we have some grass rigs and water tenders that were bought 15 years ago that are still in good shape, and we'll maintain those for another 15 years. So we'll get 30 years out of those rigs. The rest of the rigs you see here are really our fire engines and our ladder trucks are the workhorses of the fleet and get the most mileage and use. But some of the other specialty vehicles we have listed here: heavy rescue, aircraft rescue, firefighting, and wildland grass fire engines, which are a little bigger engine than we have now. We have grass trucks; these are grass fire engines. A couple of ambulances, some command vehicles, and then equipment. We listed a few equipment things here. We have a lot of stats that we can provide council, speaking points for response times for the new station locations. We have specifically not identified the exact location, but we are looking at relocating Station 8, which is at the Chemeketa Community College campus, somewhere out near Portland Road. So we'll be back in the city limits. That will vastly improve response times in the northeast part of town. And then southeast, we have some areas out there near the Mill Creek area where we would locate Station 12. So those are the general areas that we're looking at. Both of those have a positive impact on your response times for the community. The one thing that I would caution us about is while there'll be some improvements in response times by adding those 2 engines, we are also getting killed literally with our call volume. The last couple of years, we're up 17% in our call volume just this year alone. So while we'll see an improvement, we may go back the other direction if our call volume continues to go up 4,000 or 5,000 calls per year. And that's the equivalent of 2 engine companies. So, but we have all the data to supply that for speaking points when we're out in the community. And then as far as the need of the fire trucks, these trucks, when we bought them in 2007, we planned on them lasting 14 years. We'll be 15 years old this March. So we're past our expected life expectancy. Our maintenance costs, I believe, are almost $900,000 last year alone. And they look good. We take care of them. The crews, the firefighters are very proud of and respectful of the equipment that the city provides us and the community provides us. They do take really good care of them. The issue is they're mechanical, and like anything mechanical, they wear out over time. These trucks in 2023 will have the equivalent of 400,000 motor miles or drive miles on them. And most people don't drive a car with 400,000 miles on it because it's not reliable. And then your maintenance costs go through the roof. So for those reasons, and we've got some other things we can put on a fact sheet that we can put together for speaking points for people to go out and we can share a uniform message on this.
If I could, Chief, a question, and this I think goes to the mayor's point a little bit earlier. The one relocation of a fire station, I get the additional fire station. Are you able to man that fire station under the current number, or are we talking about a budget issue that we're going to have to face down the road if the bond measure passes. And the reason I ask this is clear. We built a brand new fire station and then we didn't have anybody in it for quite a while.
We do not have the staff to staff any new stations at this point. Station 8 would be a relocation of an existing station, so no new staff for that particular one. That's why this is a 10-year plan. We're not, while we anticipate purchasing the fire trucks, the very first part of this 300 million, we don't anticipate. I mean, I'd love to build two more stations tomorrow. But we have to have the finances to be able to afford to staff those. They're about $2 million a year to staff a fire station. So that's the expensive part of staffing a fire station. So no, we do not have the resources now to staff a new station.
If there are no other questions about fire, I'd like to bring us to the streets, bridges, transportations, sidewalks conversation, and then Parks and Rec. Mr. Fernandez.
You want me to jump in, Courtney?
Please.
So these are the just the general category examples of the kinds of projects that past bonds have had, and that this bond can certainly have. You know, what we call urban upgrades, and we'll probably need a better term, or just basically the project list itself, are projects that are where streets are simply, you know, 2-lane roads with no curbs, no sidewalks, no bike facilities. So, you know, they come up to a full improvement. You know, Fisher Road would be an excellent example, you know, where, you know, we might do some left turn lanes at a couple of locations, just depending as we do the analysis. Pringle Road is one of my favorites. Deep ditches, lots of people walking, lots of school children. So that's another example of an urban upgrade. You know, new traffic signals, obviously new streets. I mean, really the only new street that I can think of is, do we want to finish Marine Drive? And there could be portions of Mildred Lane out in deep Southwest Salem. There'll be a piece that's missing to connect it to Skyline. You know, bridge repair, or we would want, the staff would have some ideas on major asphalt repairs. We did, as an example, we repaved South Commercial Street with the last bond issue. We repaved large swaths of Lancaster. Those kinds of repairs come with new ADA. So any ADA, we have ADA ramps everywhere, but any place that ADA ramps don't currently meet the latest standards have to be upgraded, so they would come with things like that. Bike and ped projects, you know, standalone we can do, although all of these urban upgrades come with sidewalks and bike lanes. And then safer crossings. You know, do we have locations? Do we want to just take a good swing at doing a bunch of these, or doing installing sidewalks, you know, to connect to schools? We've done bond projects in the past that have focused on that and have been very successful and are very popular. So those are areas, if we want to do specific connections or specific projects where sidewalks are missing, then you know, those are good things to do there. So those are, again, just general categories of ideas, and to get the juices flowing. Any questions about that before we move to, go back, Courtney?
Well, any of them look like this Glen Creek, Wallace Road intersection. I wouldn't share that one too far.
Yeah, you know, I hope not. That is we don't have too many of these kinds of things in Salem. This is just a situation where that's where, you know, all the traffic in West Salem flows to the bridge.
I know.
And you know, that's the majority of the traffic has to make that right or that left at that intersection.
Well, I'm going to be real interested if that's the message for the future of Salem under this streets and bridges. I mean, you got to kind of, I just suggest that, you know, sometimes you want to revisit. That'll be run by the consultants.
Yeah, I think something like Skyline cool. might be a better,
I mean,
a better project to show. That's the more typical project, and actually the vast majority of the projects that we've done with bond projects in the past have been that. There's also the opportunity, and I think Mayor, you've brought this up at other meetings. If some of these build back better funds flow to the city, we can leverage bond funds to access those federal monies. So we're certainly hoping that we can fund McGilcrest, which is our one and only shovel-ready, fully permitted project. But if we don't, if federal funds don't flow for that, or we need money to match it, then McGilchrist should also be at the top of the list. So, any other questions or comments on streets, bridges, and sidewalks?
Yeah, one comment, only because it's on the screen right here. Irregardless of how that intersection at Glen Creek looks, it is a whole lot better than what it was before.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a lot of lanes.
A lot of cars.
Yeah, a lot of cars. Amen.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm just not sure that's the future we're pitching out there. I don't know. I wondered if Courtney, at this point, because we've now seen a couple of these sort of specific
Category areas.
fixed category areas or closer to fixed category areas, would it be worth it yet to talk about the method you have devised, the kinds of considerations you've devised for us to weigh against these, that this is the kind of thing I think that, and I'm looking at your page you sent out to us, bondable, feasible, readiness, overall cost, ongoing cost, that whole list. Would now be a time to take a look at that, to just sort of talk about it, as we now kind of know what we're up against in terms of selecting projects?
We certainly could. We also have the Parks and Recreation area to share, if that would be of interest.
Well, I'm not sure what's the context. I guess that's all I'm suggesting. I think I just want to make sure that we're talking about it in the context of what we're going to be doing in this process.
Well,
right now, these are
we're likely to get, if we focus the engagement on those areas that are scalable, that can, again, where we think the need is great, and we're looking for input about what kinds of projects people would want to fund specifically. But Peter's reference to Pringle and Fisher Road, those might come up, and that might validate spending a certain amount of money on transportation projects for those specific needs. The Parks and Recreation examples are more in sort of redoing playground equipment at existing parks and making that kind of tangible, measurable impact in a bunch of neighborhoods. So we're thinking along those lines. And if that's enough right now for people to just hold in their minds, we can easily switch over to the criteria.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what our deliverable out of this meeting is to be. What do you all want from us? The staff is going to need some sort of guidance from us, and I'm a little concerned that we'll have looked at all of these and be, intrigued. But will we have given you the kind of guidance you'll need to work with it?
I think, Mayor, having the committee give us direction that the criteria are those that we should work with to develop more specificity on projects would be very helpful, because we're already nervous that we don't have much time between now and November. So to maximize your time this afternoon, as Courtney was saying, if you're all comfortable now with kind of what we're thinking about with the categories, with certainly the opportunity to come back later to any of the categories, but if you could spend some time talking about the criteria and making sure we haven't missed any of those criteria, and those are on page I guess the first page, ideas, the page titled Ideas for Criteria.
Great. So Kelly, sorry for that. I just took the screen down. So there are a couple ways of looking at the the projects that might be included in a measure. So we talked earlier about trying to get the categories right. Do we have the right amount of funding in each of the categories that can really be scaled? And then we have kind of a lens at the entirety of the package. So once the package kind of gets settled, needing to think about geographic distribution and equity across the city, needing to think about other things as the package is developed. There's some more things to consider as whether this one should be in or this one might not be ready for this particular bond measure. And those kinds of things are in the packet as we've been referencing. Things like, is it bond eligible? And that's a really critical and weird conversation for people to have, because the city actually separates its money between capital and operating. And that's not totally how a family works. And so it's hard for people to understand. But when we're talking about things like the idea of affordable housing or sheltering, we're talking about a capital improvement, something that is either acquiring property or building something. Those things tend to be more capital in nature. So bondable is a critical thing. Feasible. We need to be able to have some assurance that the project could be completed within the bond time period. Some of these things, like for example, that Glen Creek intersection we were featuring just a couple minutes ago, might not be a good example because that's a really complicated project and has a whole bunch of property acquisition that has to occur and engineering and design. And that kind of complexity may not be really well suited for a 10-year period. Peter can probably correct me, but that's, as you're thinking about the level of complexity of something, that might drive whether it would be feasible. Another thing to consider is readiness. And for me, I've been schooled long enough to have a sense that if it's not in an infrastructure plan, we can't do it. Many years ago, I was staffing the West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board, and that group was super excited about doing something with 2nd Street. And they scoped it and it was great. And we tore off on a plan to take care of it. And it wasn't in an infrastructure plan. So it wasn't really something we could move forward with or fund. The CIP is also a great source of project ideas. And so readiness is also a factor to consider. Overall cost, if we're designating a portion of money for streets and bridges and sidewalks, do we pick a project that eats away at 90% of that money and then only leave 10% for other community sponsored projects? That's another thing to kind of consider as we're thinking through this. Ongoing cost, that was a subject that Councillor Hoy, you brought up earlier today. We're mindful that our operating side of the house is strained, and things that we do on the capital side to build a new park draw down on already constrained resources on a day-to-day basis to maintain it. And I think we had a conversation, Councillor Lewis, you brought up fire stations and staffing them. It's easier to build them with a bond, but staffing them can be a challenge on the operating side. If we can stop there for a second and just see if there are other overarching considerations for streets, bridges, and sidewalks, and for parks investments. We have a bunch of other things that we consider as we're planning for those kinds of capital investments. But I wonder if we wanted to take a minute and see if you guys have other things you want us to be mindful of or you want to put forward as possible criteria. Councillor Stapleton.
Yeah, I was reading this packet and was surprised that climate change or climate action was not on the list. And recognizing that we are also working towards our 15-year goal of reaching our half emissions. And this 10 years is going to be within that 15-year goal. I think it's important that that is at least acknowledged, if not a critical piece of the choices that we make with this money. And then I wanted to, I guess, open up a open-ended question, because I hear the word equity issued and talked about a lot, but I keep hearing other words that make me think that we're not maybe thinking about the same thing. I think I'm hearing things that are spread out across the city or balanced or equal across the city. And to me, that's not equality, that's not equity, that's equality. And so I'm trying to source that out and find out as a group here today, are we going for equity or are we going for equality? And I think that that's an important piece to pull out.
Can we talk about the climate element first? Just so what I'm not showing is how these things get scored. So there's these big ideas actually have, you know, a 1 if it achieves it and a 5 if it I don't know. I got my scale all messed up, but the question I would have about climate and climate action is, how would that be measured? Or are we looking for projects that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and they get maybe a 1 if they reduce a little bit and a 5 if they reduce a lot? Is that what you're thinking about as a way to explain the criteria?
Sure, that seems like it's an idea. I think that even having something to pull that question to the surface when you're talking about a project, we have a project and we would love to see it, or it's been in the list for a long time, but does it also now reach our climate goals is something that I think needs to be considered.
Does anyone have other ways of thinking about that? I went right to a measurable piece, but I wonder if there are other ideas for how we might wrestle with that together as we're considering, like, let's just take something like a park investment or something. How would we choose to do this park investment as opposed to this other one? If we were looking at like building a new park or replacing park equipment, how would climate factor into that conversation?
I mean, maybe in that case, Courtney, some of those can be neutral. I mean, if there really is no measurable impact, but at least we're looking at it.
Yeah, and
I like the idea, Courtney, that you had of the scoring projects in terms of is there an impact, and if so, what is it? And I think it's something that we need to be considering as we do implementation of these things. Yeah, and we might choose to do them anyway, even if they have a great impact, or no impact on it, or negative, I guess is a better way to say it. We might choose to do it anyway for some reason, but at least we will be considering that.
Thank you. So I have a question then about the idea of equity. And so here's how I understand equity. I agree the idea of equality is more about spreading impact, and equity is more about correcting impact so that there's a better balance to begin anew in investment. So my question would be, are there particular populations who we might want to focus more investment in, or particular geographic areas we might want to focus more investment in? And would we take the program as a whole and look at it in that way once it's been built? Or how would that translate to examining an individual project idea?
Yeah, I'll dive in since I threw this big conversation out on the table. Yes, I feel like there are areas of town that have been historically marginalized and invested in as a city. And I think that those historical wrongs need to be corrected. And if we go for a bond, I think the mayor talked about this earlier. We have to find ways to talk about really complex things. And this is a very complex thing in a very straightforward, easy to understand and digestible way. And if I'm completely honest, my concern is that when we start talking about equity and equality on top of taxes and bonds and all of the things that makes this complicated, and And somebody may walk away thinking, well, I'm not going to get anything out of this, so I'm not going to vote for this. That is a concern I have, but I also have a moral obligation for myself that we don't continue the status quo because it's easier. We take the hard way to do things. And I know that might not be an attractive conversation either, but I do think that there are areas of town and there are people in town who have been underinvested in for a long time, that wrong needs to be corrected. And I think that there are definitely folks in town that we need to be making specific outreach efforts to, and really focusing a lot of energy as they're there as well. And I might have more to say, but I'm going to stop and see what everybody else has to say.
I wonder, Virginia, if there are a series of factors that address equity issues, particularly the investment of funds in terms of how the funds are distributed among folks who provide the service to meet the bonded project. We do actually pretty well here in town in that area. I think 86% of the streets and bridges was with local contractors. I mean, things like that give us a certain amount of equity activity. The geographic equity is I think an interesting one, because I think we all know where we can all kind of look at the community, or I think so, and you can see where the red lines were. Not anymore, because you can't buy a house in this town without spending a great deal of money, actually. I mean, it's sort of those things have kind of disappeared. I think we'd have a lot of work that we could do to develop an understanding of what parts of town are and are not underserved, and probably be, I've seen it done, and it can be very surprising who's been underserved in this town. And their actual, I think it's counterintuitive to what I think you and I probably would see as who's getting the best deal here in town. So I wonder if maybe one of the things staff could do is take some time with this equity equality issue and help us devise a way to look at it and understand kind of what we're looking at, because you're hitting right on the kind of problem we'll face. If you don't do something in West Salem, it will be noticed and it will have a political impact. You don't do it in parts of North Salem, there's a political impact. South Salem, same thing. And while that we may think we can sit high on a hill and judge it, we also have to be politically realistic that we need this money invested in our community. And that a lot of the projects we're looking at, Fisher Road may be fixed in Northeast Salem, but it serves us all who use Fisher Road. Same with Pringle Road, or the rest of them. So I wonder if maybe that would be one we could just kind of put on the list as needing some real understanding, and maybe some advice as well from Mr. Worth on kind of how that is being dealt with in other communities that are putting together bond measures that have fairly complicated political population distributions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think that my goal here today was to bring this up and kind of lay it out on the table, and of course, take it from there. And I trust staff to take this consideration seriously and really think about it and see how we can all work together on this. Okay.
Well, then I think that would be, Courtney, something to add to the list, is kind of find a way to define that, to give us a, how do we use that as part of our list of impacts?
We'll do. And Councillor Lewis, did you want to jump in?
Well, believe it or not, even though it may be unfair, there are a great number of people who live in West Salem who believe they are underserved, especially when it comes to the additional river crossing. And that's a large voting population. And I think we need to consider everything as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that always, we've got historic issues that are going to come into play, and we're going to need to kind of work on how we're going to finesse that discussion, because there's a lot of remedial work to be done in various parts of town.
You know, one of the things that I want to notice we're talking about, but isn't yet featured or captured in the criteria, is this idea of political feasibility.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's sort of something to take into account for the package as a whole, or if there's some, to the earlier point about how we hadn't really done polling about this broad idea, whether we should do some polling earlier to test kind of the areas that we're talking about and the general the concept and the relative slicing and dicing of the funds. Would you all want to see some kind of a political measure included in the criteria?
I don't know how you take out a bond measure to election without a political component being built into it. Now, that doesn't thrill everybody. It's not this is where it gets a little bit messy, but you've got constituencies in town, both geographic and economic and, political, et cetera, that are going to have to at least be put into consideration, or we're going to go out and just get it handed to us on this thing if it isn't done right. Chris?
I wouldn't use the term political. I would say that we need a strategic consideration, like how many people are impacted or what's the potential impact in that and that sort of thing. It's kind of saying the same thing, but from a different angle. Like, what's the strategic significance of this project? And I definitely think we need to consider that. And because we need to, you want to, Fisher Road, we keep using that as an example. That might be one thing. Or let's say we did another one where maybe it's a local street or something, but it's very commonly used by people from all over town for whatever reason. Like, say something that goes to the Croc Center, because there's something there that attracts people from a wide. It's not just from the local neighborhood. So I think we definitely need to be looking at. We need to have a strategic consideration in there. Sure, because we got, if we want this thing to pass, we need it to be. We need these projects to be important and desirable.
Yeah, it's kind of, I agree. I like the strategic word better than political. But it's still tomato. We've got to have that the real world consideration on the table, that we got to get enough votes to pass this thing. If we don't, we're going to have to come back at it a different way, which would be really unfortunate, because this is really a fantastic idea. This is a tremendous opportunity we shouldn't lose over not thinking strategically, along with some of the other issues.
Yeah, Courtney,
agreed. And I just think it's important to remember that first we got to get to 9 votes before we can get to a majority in the city. You know what I mean? So we got to be thinking about our colleagues too.
I think we got a lot of our colleagues here, so if they've got a problem, we need to hear about. That's what I'm hoping we'll hear. Are we?
Well, I heard the message earlier that it's important to be unanimous. So I'm just tossing.
Oh yeah,
that out.
You're right. Absolutely right. Nobody. We won't want to lose anybody on this thing.
Courtney, this is Jose. I have a question. Is that breakdown that you showed, is that what people are going to see, the public, as you go out there? Are you thinking about taking something like that, the breakdown where it shows fire trucks and?
Yes, we were planning to help people understand the composition of the 300 million. And then certainly to part of the conversation earlier, we have to be a lot more specific as we move closer to the measure being on the ballot.
The reason I ask is, I put myself in somebody's shoes that is not as involved. And I would look at that and say, the money's already spent. It seems like they've already decided. Someone has. So I don't know if their question to me is going to be authentic, if it's really going to matter. I know why we need fire trucks, but someone's going to say, well, the chief has never presented to me, someone at the neighborhood association. I've never met him. I don't know what that means to me. So when I see that, when I saw it today in the information, I thought, well, someone's made some decisions already. And that's what I think we should try to avoid, because even though we're talking about the success of 2008, it's a different world. And the method of information, the way information flows today is completely different. Just thinking about social media. Neighborhood associations aren't as impactful as they used to because of the way information is shared today. I think one of the things just to keep in mind that I think will be beneficial for talking that we just finished another bond package is to actually show people the projects that have been done, the ones that have impacted them, the ones they can see visibly. And going back to the mayor's point about people coming up to him and not trusting, why I understand. If we don't show them success, well, why would they believe us? So as we go into these neighborhoods, it'd be nice to show what happened in their neighborhood or close by. So that way they can understand that this is show some success from the city and a little bit of buy-in going forward.
Yeah.
If I might,
Yeah.
Courtney, you mentioned the idea of polling, and when I look at the plan, it calls for polling at the end before the vote, which I've always felt was kind of backwards. I'm a real fan of doing polling, budget aside, doing polling throughout the process. As we go through this, step by step, if we can get confirmation or rejection, then it helps us with the next step. And so I'm a fan of doing the polling if the budget allows.
Thank you. Councilor
Courtney.
Sanders?
Yeah, I just wanted, sorry about my notifications. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated both what Councilor Hoy just said and Councilor Gonzalez, and I'll go backwards, I guess. With Councilor Gonzalez, thank you so much. This is amazing. I think it's so important, especially, and I don't know if it's my demographics or not, but having that story to tell of the success that we did last time. You trusted us before with this. Here's what we accomplished together. Isn't this fantastic? And we're asking for you to trust us again. I think that's really powerful. And to what Chris was talking about, and now my mind is going blank. I might have to come back. Yeah, let me, I don't think I made a note either. So let me come back to it when I remember. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Other input? Other things that you want to make sure, or you would want to know, or you would want to make sure people would know as we're out talking about these ideas?
Okay, so I remembered. Can I go again? Sorry.
Yes.
So I love that he was talking about looking at these projects and kind of quantifying how many or the range in which people would be positively impacted by this. I look at like Gear Park, a community park, right? Wouldn't it be amazing to add connecting that street to Hawthorne as one of our projects? And how many people would that positively impact being a community park and in this area of town? I like that idea of trying to quantify who's going to be impacted and in which way. I think I understood you right, Councilor Hoy. Am I following you? Okay, good.
Courtney, I too really liked what Jose had to say about the kind of the success going back. I wonder if one of the factors is kind of how it fits in, sort of that historical success or some sort of historical review of how this has worked over the years. I mean, we have such a good story out of streets and bridges, and we have really good stories out of all of our bond measures that we can go to and show by ward. We can show what the impacts look like. And as well as I find regularly, and it's kind of, I don't know, I'm sure everyone else runs into it, is the number of people who send me these one-off suggestions on how to cure homelessness, and you have to send back the package kind of to them saying, well, here's what we're doing. And then you get back I had no idea this much was going on in Salem around homelessness. And, you know, it's that kind of information in units that we can use around the city, I think would be really helpful. And I think help in the evaluation of projects as well.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett. Other ideas that people want to make sure we're addressing in either messaging or in the criteria?
So is everyone comfortable? We're going to move this for this we're sort of as a group saying, now staff, here's our suggestions to you from this meeting. I mean, is there anything we're missing or anything you feel should not be moving forward? I'm thinking of this list right now because it's real tangible. And that's the bondable, feasible,
Strategic.
discussion, strategic, that whole discussion we just had. Is everybody okay with that moving forward then to staff with we'd like you to start looking at this stuff through this series of lenses and criteria? Okay, good. We also have that includes the streets, bridges, for parks. Yeah, and that really is the whole package. Do you see how the whole package looks? This is what we're looking at for parks. We're looking at for streets and bridges. I mean, there's a batch of criteria associated all together. And I just want to make sure that Courtney had put together that it's okay to move those to the staff saying, this is what we'd like you to evaluate all this stuff based on these criteria.
And sorry, go ahead, Councilor Stapleton.
Just a quick question. Was the library at East Salem branch, is that somewhere on there? When I did a quick scan, I saw streets and bridges and parks, and but not necessarily a call out on the library. Is that something we need to talk about, or?
You've got city buildings. It might be, you might be able to talk about it in there, but no, the library wasn't included. But there's that sort of city buildings package. I don't know if anyone else saw it that way. I saw it as that'd be the category I'd see it in if we could find a way to pay for it over the years, which is probably the hard part.
Is that what staff was thinking, or is that not actually included?
No, the public buildings is really the civic center, although again, that's a draft from staff, and if the committee wanted to look at that category through a different need, you certainly can.
Well, I think it would be, at least speaking for Northeast Salem, I think it would be important to keep it on there, at least through the process of public input and gathering data from folks, and whether it's something that we can ultimately end up doing or not. I think that maybe can be decided at a later future, but I would hate to see it cut off at the very first meeting. I'd like to see it stay on there to see if we can't, hear from the public to see what they're really wanting to get from this.
I think I just a thought, and it's back to Jose's comments is are these a done deal? I mean, is there no room? It's on the list now. Lois sent us a letter saying, I'd like you to look at these. That's how stuff gets on the list. It's not us deciding yet what's on the list. And we're asking the staff, as ideas come in, I would assume we will have an evaluation of library branches at some point given to us based on these criteria. Does that, so it's so this list is open. It's not us, what we don't want to do is limit the list. We want to keep it as open as we can. And I guess what I was looking at is, well, is there a category where I could say, yeah, you could talk about it inside that category? That'd be the public buildings category.
Yeah.
It's not there. It is now because Lois brought it up. You know what I mean? That's how it'll work, I think, if we're going to have any integrity in our public input process. And I think we better have really open minds and be prepared to hear a whole bunch of ideas, and then also put them through the ringer like any other idea we've got. Probably the one that is least likely to get that we have real heavy expertise on right now is that fire bond. We really know exactly through the chief what we need there, unless there's some real interesting, we don't need fire trucks anymore and you all agree. But that's where we start losing people on the council. So, we got to kind of keep our act together here.
I just, if I could, I just wanted to make sure that in the scalable categories that those numbers are not fixed. We may indeed think that, maybe $125 million is enough for streets, bridges, sidewalks, and bicycle paths, and we need to move something into the building improvements that could include libraries. So those numbers are not fixed. They are in the fixed categories, which makes it easy, at least for me. Our really hard work is going to be how we scale these scalable projects.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it, Jim.
Well, that I'm going to have to say I sense the meeting is coming to an end, but I have to leave, so I apologize. But I got to go. Thank you.
See ya. Okay. Courtney, is there anything else you need from us right now?
I'm grateful for this conversation, and that's really what I was hoping to do, is to have a chance to share a little bit about the background and where we think this might be going, and then get your input on how you might be thinking or what you might be wrestling with as we consider some of these project ideas as they come forward. So my expectation, my hope, is to bring back, the next time this group gets together, bring back a draft set of those criteria that reflect the 3 ads that we had a conversation about today. And so you can really kind of play with them, practice with them, and see how they work. And then hopefully solicit some kind of a recommendation for the council to consider those criteria as we continue down this path together.
Okay, and then our next meeting will be when?
I was aiming for the first week, which might be challenging, in January of the month. And I think right now we're feeling calendars and trying to get a sense. And as we get deeper into the messaging and more specificity about the projects, we'll probably need to meet a little bit more frequently.
I tell you, one thing that would be very helpful at the next meeting is if you have developed any kind of messaging that we can use out on the stump. If you've got some things that you are already thinking we ought to be prepared to start using that help us communicate this, because as people start learning about it, they're going to be asking, and how we present this early on. And I think it is going to be real important. I mean, I'll tell you one message that I don't underestimate what we heard was from Jose, where we're looking at something that looks like a done deal. And well, how much of this is available for full discussion? What's really happening here? Or is it all done? That kind of stuff, I think, is real important for us to be able to communicate out out to our constituencies. That it is not a done deal. This is still open for discussion, wide open.
Thank you. Just real quick, does Friday feel all right? Does a 1 o'clock start feel all right? Did anyone have any challenges getting here for this kind of, okay, I'm seeing shaking of heads. So we'll take that into consideration and get out a set of dates to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything for the good of the order then? Anybody? Okay, then we are adjourned until sometime in early January. We'll see you then. Thank you. And if you have any suggestions, contact me, Courtney, Steve, however you want to do it. But let's try to get the stuff on the agenda as things come to mind that you think we need to cover.
Yeah, or if you have questions within the categories or project ideas, please go straight to the subject matter expert. You know, Krishna on the IT and public buildings, Peter, parks and streets, Mike. So it doesn't have to all flow through Courtney.
Okay, great. Thank you.